Hello, everybody. This is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 1, Section 5. Stepan Arkadyevitch had done well at school, thanks to his excellent natural gifts, but he was lazy and idle, and consequently had been at the foot of his class. Although he had always been gay and took a low rank at the chin, and was still quite young, he nevertheless held an important salaried position as nachalnik, or president of one of the courts in Moscow. This place he had won through the good offices of his sister Anna's husband, Alexey Alexandrovitch Karenin, who was one of the most influential members of the ministry. But even if Karenin had not been able to get this place for Steva Arkadyevitch, 100 other people, brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, aunts, would have got it for him, or found him some place as good, together with the 6,000 ruples salary which he needed for his establishment, his affairs being somewhat out of order in spite of his wife's considerable fortune. Half the people of Moscow and St. Petersburg were relatives or friends of Stepan Arkadyevitch. He was born into the society of the rich and powerful of this world. A third of the officials attached to the court and in government employ had been friends of his father, and had known him from the time when he wore petticoats. The second third addressed him familiarly. The others were hail fellows, well met. He had, therefore, on his side all those whose function it is to dispense the blessings of the land in the form of places, leases, concessions, and such things, and who could not afford to neglect their own friends. Oblonsky had no trouble in obtaining an excellent place. His only aim was to avoid jealousies, quarrels, offences, which was not a difficult thing because of his natural good temper. He would have thought it ridiculous if he had been told that he could not have any place that he wanted with the salary attached, because it did not seem to him that he demanded anything extraordinary. He only asked for what his companions were obtaining, and he felt that he was as capable as any of them of doing the work. Stepan Arkadyevitch was liked by everyone, not only on account of his good and amiable character and his unimpeachable honesty, but for his brilliance and attractive personality. There was something in his bright, sparkling, keen eyes, his black brows, his hair, his vivid coloring, which exercised a strong physical influence on those with whom he came in contact. "Aha, Steva, Oblonsky, here he is," people would say with a smile of pleasure, and when they saw him, and though the results of meeting him were not particularly gratifying, nevertheless people were just as glad to meet him the second day and the third. After he had filled for 3 years the office of nachalnik, Stepan Arkadyevitch had gained not only the friendship but also the respect of his colleagues, both those above and those below him in station, as well as of the citizens with whom he had come in contact. The qualities which gained him this universal esteem were, first, his extreme indulgence for everyone, which was founded on the knowledge of what was lacking in himself. Secondly, his absolute liberality, which was not the liberalism for which his journal was responsible, but that which flowed naturally in his veins, and caused him to be agreeable to everyone in whatever station of life. And thirdly, and principally, his perfect indifference to the business which he transacted, so that he never lost his temper, and therefore never made mistakes. As soon as he reached his tribunal, he retired to his private office, solemnly accompanied by the Swiss guard who bore his portfolio, and having put on his uniform, went to the courtroom. The employees all stood up as he passed and greeted him with respectful smiles. Stepan Arkadyevitch, in accordance with his usual custom, hastened to his place, and after shaking hands with the other members of the council, he sat down. He uttered a few familiar words, full of good humor and suitable to the occasion, and then opened the session. No one better than he understood how to preserve the official tone, and, at the same time, give his words that impression of simplicity and good nature which is so useful in the expedition of official business. The secretary came up, and with the free and yet respectful air common to all who surrounded Stepan Arkadyevitch, handed him his papers, and spoke in the familiarly liberal tone which Stepan Arkadyevitch had introduced. "We have at last succeeded in obtaining reports from the government of Penza. Permit me to hand them to you." "So we have them at last," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, pushing the papers away with his finger. "Now then, gentlemen," and the proceedings began. If they only knew, he thought, as he bent his head with an air of importance while the report was read, how much their president, only a half-hour since, looked like a naughty schoolboy, and his eyes shone with merriment as he listened to the report. The session generally lasted till 2 o'clock without interruption, and was followed by recess and luncheon. The hour had not yet struck when the great glass doors of the hall were thrown open, and someone entered. All the members of the council, glad of any diversion, turned round to look, but the doorkeeper instantly ejected the intruder and shut the door upon him. After the matter under consideration was settled, Stepan Arkadyevitch rose, and in the spirit of sacrifice to the liberalism of the time took out his cigarette, while still in the courtroom, and then passed it into his private office. Two of his colleagues, the aged veteran Nikitin and the Kammerjunker Grinovitch, followed him. "There will be time enough to finish after lunch," said Oblonsky. "I think so," replied Nikitin. "This Famin must be a precious rascal," said Grinovitch, alluding to one of the characters in the matter which they had been investigating. Stepan Arkadyevitch knit his brow at Grinovitch's words, as though to signify that it was not the right thing to form snap judgments, and he remained silent. "Who was it came into the court-room?" he demanded of the doorkeeper. "Someone who entered without permission, Your Excellency, while my back was turned. He wanted to see you. I said, 'When the session is over, then.' 'Where is he?' 'Probably in the vestibule. He was there a moment ago.' 'Ah, there he is,' said the doorkeeper, pointing to a fair-complexioned, broad-shouldered man with curly hair, who, neglecting to remove his sheepskin shapka, was lightly and quickly running up the well-warmed steps of the stone staircase. An employé on his way down, with portfolio under his arm, had stopped to look with some indignation at the feet of the young man, and turned to Oblonsky with a glance of inquiry. Stepan Arkadyevitch stood at the top of the staircase. His bright face, set off by the broad collar of his uniform, was still more radiant when he recognized the visitor. "Here he is at last!" he cried, with a friendly, though slightly ironical smile, as he looked at Levin. "What, you got tired of waiting for me and have to come find me in this den?" he said, not satisfied with pressing his friend's hand, but kissing him affectionately. "When did you arrive?" "I just got here and was very anxious to see you," said Levin timidly, as he looked around him with distrust and scorn. "All right, come into my office," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, who was aware of the egotistic sensitiveness of his visitor, and, as though he wanted to avoid some danger, he took him by the hand to show him the way. Stepan Arkadyevitch addressed almost all of his acquaintances with the familiar "you." Old men of 60, young men of 20, actors and ministers, merchants and generals, all with whom he had ever drunken champagne, and with whom he had not drunken champagne. Among the people thus brought into his intimacy in the two extremes of the social scale, there would have been some astonishment to know that, thanks to him, there was something in common among them. But when, in the presence of his inferiors, he came in contact with any of his shameful intimates, as he jestingly called some of his acquaintances, he had the tact to save them from disagreeable impressions. Levin was not one of his shameful intimates. He was a friend of his boyhood, but Oblonsky felt that it might be unpleasant to make a public exhibition of their intimacy, and therefore he hastened to withdraw from him. Levin was about the same age as Oblonsky, and their intimacy arose not only from champagne, but because, in spite of the difference of their characters and their tastes, they were fond of each other in the way of friends who had grown up together. But, as often happens among men who move in different spheres, each allowed his reason to approve of the character and believed his own mode of life to be the only rational way of living. At the sight of Levin, Oblonsky could not repress an ironical smile. How many times had he seen him in Moscow, just in from the country, where he had been doing something great, though Oblonsky did not know exactly what. and scarcely took any interest in it. Levin always came to Moscow anxious, hurried, and a trifle vexed, and vexed because he was vexed, and generally bringing with him new and unexpected ideas about life and things. Stepan Arkadyevitch laughed at this, and yet liked it. Levin, for his part, despised the life which his friend led in Moscow, treated his official employment with light scorn, and made sport of him. But Oblonsky took this ridicule in good part, like a man sure of being in the right, while Levin, because he was not assured in his own mind, sometimes got angry. "We've been expecting you for some time," said Stepan Arkadyevitch as he entered the office and let go his friend's hand to show that the danger was past. "Am I very glad to see you," he continued. "How goes it? How are you? When did you come?" Levin was silent, and looked at the unknown faces of Oblonsky's two colleagues. The elegant Grinovitch was completely absorbed in studying his white hands, and his fingers with their long, yellow, and pointed nails, and his cuffs with their huge, gleaming cuff buttons. Oblonsky noticed what he was doing, and smiled. "Ah, yes," said he, "allow me to make you acquainted. My colleagues, Philip Ivanovitch Nikitin, Mikhail Stanislavitch Grinovitch," then turned to Levin, "a landed proprietor, a rising man, a member of the Zemstvo, and a gymnast who can lift 5 puds with one hand, a raiser of cattle, a celebrated hunter, and my friend, Konstantin Dmitrievitch Levin, brother of Sergei Ivanovitch Koznuishev." "Very happy," said the oldest of the company. "I have the honor of knowing your brother, Sergei Ivanovitch," said Grinovitch, extending his delicate hand. Levin's face grew dark. He coldly shook hands and turned to Oblonsky. Although he had much respect for his half-brother, a writer universally known in Russia, it was none the less unpleasant for him to be addressed, not as Konstantin Levin, but as the brother of the famous Kuznuishev. "No, I am not doing anything any more. I have quarreled with everybody, and I don't go to the assemblies," said he to Oblonsky. "This is a sudden change," said the latter with a smile. "But how? Why?" "It's a long story, and I will tell it some other time," replied Levin, but he nevertheless went on to say, "To make a long story short, I am convinced that no action amounts to anything, or can any amount to anything, in our provincial assemblies. On the one hand, they try to play parliament, and I am not young enough and not old enough to amuse myself with toys. And on the other hand," he hesitated, "this serves the coterie of the district to make a few pennies. There used to be guardianships, judgments, but now we have zemstvo, not in the way of bribes, but in the way of absorbing salaried offices." He said these words with some heat, and with the manner of a man who expects to be contradicted. "Aha! Here we find you in a new phase. You are becoming a conservative," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Well, we'll speak about this by and by." "Yes, by and by. But I want to see you particularly," said Levin, looking with scorn at Grinovitch's hand. Stepan Arkadyevitch smiled imperceptibly. "Didn't you say that you would never again put on European clothes?" he asked, examining the new suit made by a French tailor, which his friend wore. "Indeed, I see 'tis a new phase." Levin suddenly blushed, not as grown men blush without perceiving it, but as timid and absurd boys blush, and it made him grow still redder. It gave his intelligent, manly face a strange appearance that Oblonsky ceased to look at him. "But where can we meet? I must have to talk with you," said Levin. Oblonsky reflected. "How is this? We will go and take lunch at Hereine's, and we can talk there. At 3 o'clock I shall be free." "No," answered Levin after a moment's thought. "I've got to take a drive." "Well, then, let's dine together." "Dine? But I have nothing very particular to say, only 2 words, a short sentence. Afterwards, we can gossip." "In that case, speak your 2 words now. We will talk while we are eating." "These 2 words are... But, however, they are not very important." His face assumed a hard expression, due to his efforts to conquer his timidity. "What are the Sherbatskys doing? Just as they used to?" Stepan Arkadyevitch had long known that Levin was in love with his sister-in-law Kitty. He smiled, and his eyes flashed gaily. "You have said your say in 2 words, but I cannot answer in 2 words because— Excuse me a moment." The secretary came in at this juncture with his familiar but respectful bearing, and with that modest assumption peculiar to all secretaries that he knew more about business than his superior. He brought some papers to Oblonsky, and under the form of a question he attempted to explain some difficulty. Without waiting to hear the end of the explanation, Stepan Arkadyevitch laid his hand confidentially on the secretary's arm. "No, do as I asked you to," said he, tempering his remark with a smile, and having briefly given his own explanation of the matter, he pushed away the papers and said, "Do it so, I beg of you, Zakhar Nikititch." The secretary went off confused. Levin, during his little interview, had collected his thoughts, and, standing behind a chair on which he rested his elbows, he listened with ironical attention. I don't understand, he said. "What is it that you don't understand?" asked Oblonsky, smiling and hunting for a cigarette. He was expecting some sort of strange outbreak from Levin. "I don't understand what you are up to," said Levin, shrugging his shoulders. "How can you take this sort of thing seriously?" "Why not?" "Why, because it doesn't mean anything." "You think so?" "On the contrary, we have more work than we can do. Business on paper. Well, yes, you have a special gift for such things," added Levin. "You mean that there is something that I lack? Perhaps so, yes. However, I cannot help admiring your high and mighty ways, and rejoicing that I have for a friend a man of such importance. Meantime, you have not answered my question," he added, making a desperate effort to look Oblonsky full in the face. "Well then, very good, very good. Keep it up, and you will succeed. 'Tis well that you have 3,000 desyatins of land in the district of Karazinsk. Such muscles, and the complexion of a little girl of 12, but you will succeed all the same. Yes, as to what you asked me, there is no change, but I am sorry that it has been so long since you were in town." "Why?" demanded Levin. "Because," replied Oblonsky. "But we will talk things over by and by. What brought you now?" "Ah, we will speak also of that by and by," said Levin, blushing to his very ears. "Very good, I understand you," said Stepan Arkadyevitch. "Do you see, I should have invited you to dine with me at home, but my wife is not well today. If you want to see them, you will find them at the Zoological Gardens from 4 to 5. Kitty is off skating. Goodbye now. I will join you later, and we will go and get dinner together." "Excellent. Au revoir." Levin left the room, and only remembered when he had passed the door that he had forgotten to salute Oblonsky's colleagues. "That must be a man of energy," said Grinovitch after Levin had taken his departure. "Yes, Batyushka," said Stepan Arkadyevitch, throwing his head back. "He is a likely fellow. 3,000 desyatins in the Karazinsk district. He has a future before him, and how young he is! He is not like the rest of us." "What have you to complain about, Stepan Arkadyevitch?" "Yes, everything goes wrong," replied Stepan Arkadyevitch, drawing a deep sigh.